56 BC, when Marcus Licinius Crassus met with Caesar in Ravenna, Caesar promised to send a legion to Rome after the campaign season to ensure that Crassus and Pompeius Magnus would win the consular elections of 55 BC. When the legion arrived, it was commanded by Crassus's younger son, Publius Crassus, who had performed brilliantly in Gaul. Not only did Publius save the day when Caesar's left flank began to crumble against Ariovistus, but he also contributed to Caesar's overall victory over the Venetians by suppressing rebellious tribes in the region later known as Aquitaine. With Publius in Rome, Marcus Licinius Crassus seized the opportunity to consummate his son's betrothal, which had been arranged before Publius came of age. To preserve his reputation with Rome's conservative families, and despite secretly funding populist politicians such as Catiline, Claudius and Caesar, Crassus chose to marry his son Publius to the daughter of Metellus Scipio. Her name was Cornelia Metella, and through her father she was a fourth-generation granddaughter of Cornelius Scipio Nasica, the man who orchestrated the assassination of Tiberius Gracchus, and a fourth-generation granddaughter of Cornelius Scipio Africanus, the man who defeated Hannibal. Cornelia Metella's lineage is further strengthened by the fact that she had been adopted by the late Pope Metellus Pius in her youth. Besides Publius's marriage to Cornelia Metella, Marcus Licinius Crassus strengthened his alliance with the Metellian clan by arranging the marriage of his eldest son, also named Marcus, to Cecilia Metella, daughter of Metellus Creticus. Following the marriage of his two sons and the Tribonian law, which granted him the 5-year rule of Syria and the right to invade Parthia, Marcus Licinius Crassus set out for his province in November 55 BC. Crassus arrived in Syria late in the year and began recruiting his army. Using his personal wealth, he raised 7 legions, numbering around 35,000 men. Crassus also received 4,000 light infantry from Rome's Hellenic allies in the east, and 6,000 cavalry from King Artavasdes of Armenia. King Artavasdes, son of the deceased King Tigranes, offered Crassus 10,000 cavalry and an additional 30,000 light infantry if Crassus agreed to invade Parthia through Armenia, which would hinder the movements of the Parthian cataphracts and cavalry. Crassus rejected the offer and marched across the Euphrates into Mesopotamia. At the small town of Acnae, on the west bank of the Palek River, Crassus's army encountered the forces of his general Silas, whom he easily defeated. As Crassus advanced to capture the towns of Nicephorium and Carrhae, Silas, though wounded, survived and fled to the court of Orodes, king of Parthia, to inform him of the invasion of Rome. The town of Zenodotium, which shared the west bank of the Palek River with Achaea, Nicephorium and Carrhae, requested a Roman garrison. When Crassus sent the garrison, the inhabitants of Zenodotium massacred it, prompting Crassus to incur Rome's wrath as well. By the end of the campaign season, in 54 BC, Crassus had fortified the main fortresses along the west bank of the Balk River in Mesopotamia. Satisfied with his initial progress, he returned to Syria to spend the winter with his troops. Needing more cavalry, Crassus, who had maintained regular contact with Caesar throughout their individual campaigns, asked Caesar to release his son, Publius, into his service. Publius Crassus agreed, accompanied by 1,000 of Caesar's Gallic cavalry, and they arrived in Syria before the campaign season of 53 BC. In response to Crassus's capture of the major cities of Parthia, the Parthian king Orodes mobilized 2 armies. The first, commanded by himself, accompanied him to support his mission to expel Armenia from the war. Once in Armenia, King Orodes reached an agreement with King Artavasdes, sealed by a marriage contract between Artavasdes' son and one of Orodes' sisters. King Orodes ordered his second army, composed entirely of cavalry and commanded by a general named Surena, to advance on Crassus and delay the Romans until his arrival. Before Crassus left Syria in the spring of 53 BC, he was visited by a Parthian ambassador named Vagissus. King Orodes was prepared to give Crassus the opportunity to retreat and withdraw from Parthia completely, despite his advance into Mesopotamia and the capture of several of its cities. When Vagissus pressed him for a response, Crassus haughtily replied, that he would receive his answer as soon as Crassus reached Seleucia, the Parthia capital. Vergisus pointed to his palm and replied, "Crassus, hair will grow here before you see Seleucia." To finance his war, Crassus plundered the temple of Hierapolis, then marched into Judea to plunder the treasures of the temple of Jerusalem as well. Crassus then led his legions forcefully through Mesopotamia, where he received news that the Parthian army had crossed the Balk River. One of his envoys, Gaius Cassius Longinus, accompanied by other officers, advised him to set up camp. His men marched across Mesopotamia quickly. They were hungry, tired, and in need of rest. But Crassus received a message from Artavasdes, who, unaware of his alliance with Orodes, informed him that the crumbling Parthia army was about to collapse. Under pressure from his son Publius, eager to fight and earn more military honours, Crassus ordered his men to eat a quick meal and then forced his army to continue marching across the Balk River into the desert. Driven far from any water source, Crassus's scouts finally found General Surena's army. Most of the scouts were killed, but a few returned to warn Crassus. As the legions approached, Surena deceived the Romans by hiding the depth of his army behind the width of his vanguard. He also ordered his combat cavalry to cover their armour with cloaks, so the Romans would mistake them for ordinary horsemen. Initially, Crassus believed the Parthian army was inferior, so he followed the advice of his quaestor, Cassius, and deployed his army in the traditional manner, placing infantry in the centre and cavalry on the wings. But at the last minute, Crassus suddenly changed his mind. To prevent the enemy from encircling his army, he ordered his troops to redeploy in a square formation. Surena beat hollow drums to shake the Roman army's nerves and gave the order to attack. Eager to turn the Romans' fear into terror, Surena ordered his cavalry, who were at the forefront of the attack, to remove their armour at the last moment, revealing their deadly nature. The Romans reinforced their armour, withstood the cavalry charge, and prepared to repel the cavalry charge. But Surena's cavalry split up, riding on either side of the Roman arena. Once Surena's cavalry had completely surrounded the Roman legions, a volley of arrows was unleashed. The Romans responded with a testudo formation, hoping to withstand the missile fire until their cavalry ran out of arrows. But Surena had also brought 1,000 camels, laden with barbed arrows, which moved back and forth, constantly resupplying the Parthian archers. The Roman shield was normally capable of deflecting arrows, but it was less effective against the Parthian barbed arrows, which were more capable of penetrating their armour. As the relentless hail of arrows battered the Roman arena, the arms and legs of Crassus's infantry were pinned inside their shields, their feet nailed to the ground. As the Romans fell under the hail of arrows, surrounded by the screams of the pierced, Crassus ordered his son to lead a surprise attack. Publius Crassus, accompanied by several thousand legionaries and cavalry, rushed out of the arena, catching the Parthian cavalry by surprise. When the Parthians turned and fled, Publius Crassus, not wanting to lose the advantage, pursued them. Because the Parthian cavalry, mounted on charging horses, were able to fire arrows after them, Publius and his men continued to endure the hail of missile fire. Eventually, the Parthians slowed down. Having successfully lured the attacking Romans into the deadly reserves of the cataphracts, the Parthian army turned and began attacking Publius Crassus's forces. Defeated in the ambush, Publius Crassus led the surviving cataphracts to a nearby hill. There, to prevent the Parthians from capturing him alive, Publius Crassus persuaded one of his legionaries to kill him. Crassus, still commanding from within the arena, watched his men fall under heavy cannon fire. Formed in square, instead of the usual Roman defensive line, his army's movement was severely hampered. Nevertheless, Crassus continued to fight, to push his men forward to rescue Publius, who was unaware that he was already dead. Then the arrows stopped. The Parthians began beating their hollow drums again, attracting the Romans' attention. A troop of charging horse approached the Roman arena. A single horseman advanced, parading in front of the Roman legionary. On the horseman's spear, before the eyes of Marcus Licinius Crassus and all his men, was the severed head of his son, Publius Crassus. With the Roman spirit completely broken and Crassus paralyzed with grief, the Parthians resumed their relentless barrage of arrows.